Financial Survival Network, helping you survive and thrive in the new economy. For a free financial survival toolkit and newsletter, sign up at KerryLutz.com, KerryLutz.com.
1490 WGCH, this is Kerry Lutz. You're listening to the Financial Survival Network. Time for another Triple Lutz Report. I'm up here in Vancouver, Canada for the Vancouver Resource Show, at which over 550 mining companies are exhibiting. And it's the first one I've been to. Made some friends up here in Vancouver from other shows that I've been to. And I'm excited. It starts tomorrow on Sunday, January 22nd, and I'll be reporting back. I plan to interview a lot of people there. But what I want to talk to you right now about is much more personal. And that is, we're in the midst of a depression. Whether the economists want to admit it, whether the president or any of the candidates want to admit it, maybe Ron Paul's alluded to it a number of times, but I don't remember him specifically coming out and saying that we're in an economic depression. But if I'm wrong, I'll stand corrected. And my family had a lot of experience with the Great Depression, the one that started in 1929 with the crash of the stock market and lasted for, really, when you get down to it, the late 1940s. Popular myth says that FDR saved the country. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. The programs, the collectivist programs that he implemented are what is killing our country now. Those programs and the ones that have been added onto in succeeding decades and generations. If you look at what happened, our country was in a period of innocence back then. People had values, people honored their obligations, they paid their debts. Going bankrupt in that day and age was like being excommunicated from your church. You just didn't do it unless there was no other way around it. Now look, people have been going bankrupt in the United States since its founding in 1776, and the Congress set up bankruptcy courts for that purpose. The United States is the land of the second, third, fourth, and fifth chances. And the fact is, people coming to the United States came for second chances. So it's ingrained in our nature that you can fail and fail a number of times and still wind up succeeding. And we all know the stories of well-known industrialists and business people who've had multiple failures. Look at Donald Trump, for instance, and have come back and really made something of themselves. But when you're in an economic depression, and this is enveloping the entire world, it's even coming to Canada. They seemingly have been exempt for a period of time, but it's a time when everybody gets poorer, except for a very, very few super wealthy people. A lot of them are poorer too, but they had $5 billion and they're worth $3 billion now. I mean, we really feel great sympathy towards them, don't we? But I want to tell you my family's personal experience during the Great Depression and how it has shaped me and my financial plans and convinced me that in times of economic prosperity, you need to plan for recessions and depressions, and in times of recessions and depressions, you need to plan for prosperity. So my father's family was very well off going into the Depression. My grandfather was the first person who figured out that you could actually bury a gas tank at a gas station and use an electric pump to pump the gasoline out of the pump and into the person's vehicle. You know, he was a lot like the Wright brothers. They said it would never fly. He said, I can bury this tank and then it'll make gas stations much easier to locate. You won't need so much room, because prior to that, the large tanks, multi-thousand gallon tanks, were placed on stilts so that they were gravity fed and there was no need for a pump to pump the gasoline into the car. And this was in the teens. He did it. He buried the tank, hooked it up to an electric pump, and boom, it worked. And instantly, overnight, all the major oil companies were his clients, and he was doing jobs all over New Jersey and New York and Pennsylvania, all over the place. And my father grew up in an affluent household in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And then, boom, the Depression came. He was overextended. He wasn't an educated man by any stretch. Believed that you just invested in the stock market, it went up, and you got rich. All of his margin calls were pulled on him. The stocks were sold out from underneath him. He still had money in a safe deposit box. He owned a lot of real estate, but real estate went several years later. And he had, at that point, the family lore was he had $250,000 in a safe deposit box, which is probably the equivalent of about 15 million at this point, or 10 million, something like that. But it was a lot of money for that day and age. Those bills in that safe deposit box were actually backed by gold at the time. Maybe not as much as people thought, but they were backed up by gold. He lost it all. They lived in a large house. They moved to a smaller house in like a less desirable part of town. And he was broken after that. There was no way that he was going to come back. He eked out a living after that. And my father was really scarred by this because prior to this, he was in a happy, joyful home. And when the money went, the happiness went right out the door with it. And there were marital ills and just a bad time that my father basically repressed it from his memory. And when my father was 16, he played a number and he won enough money to buy a gas station. And he'd been an ace mechanic since he was a kid, so it seemed like a natural fit. My mother's family, on the other hand, my grandfather was a roofer. He never made a lot of money before the Depression, but he had a reputation for honesty and integrity. And when you wanted a job to come in under budget and early, you went to Abe. And he got a nickname, Honest Abe. So the Depression hits, he was out of work for about 6 months. And then the government started these massive reconstruction programs. I think it was the RCA or the RFA, one of these alphabet soup organizations. And my grandfather got in there and cleaned up. He made his fortune during the Depression. And my mother and my grandmother were wearing fur coats in the middle of the Depression. That's how well he did. And he held on to that money. He never spent unwisely. They saved everything that he made. He bought some diamonds, not the best, but they turned out to be a good investment. Everything the guy touched turned to gold. And they were living high on the hog. So when I think of a Depression, I think of that dichotomy. On the one hand, a family that was riding high and now is riding low. And then on the other hand, a family that was riding low and then is riding high. And the fact is, during the Great Depression, more millionaires were made in the United States than at any other time in history. And that tells you that the Chinese symbol for crisis is made up of two characters. One is danger and the other's opportunity. And whereas my father's family, they just got the danger part, my mother's family got the opportunity part. The only reason I'm discussing this is because you have to be realistic. You've got to look at things and form as valid, as accurate a picture of the landscape as you possibly can. This is crucial. And then you need to have a plan for it. I don't think we've hit the worst of this Depression yet. It's ahead of us. It'll be here sooner rather than later. The government cannot save us from what's going to happen. The only people that can save us is us. Make that financial survival plan. Get the financial toolkit. Go to kerrylutz.com, KERRYLUTZ.com. Sign up for the toolkit, all right? There's a lot of links in there. There's a lot of helpful information that's going to help you plan and survive and thrive in this economy. Invest in yourself. Get the skills that people are going to need regardless what the economy is. There's certain things we have to have. And whatever happens to the monetary system, I believe it's simply going to evolve. We're going to have a period of near chaos, but I don't believe it's going to break down into absolute, utter chaos. And that's always the fear. But we're going to have this chaotic period. Government services are going to be cut back. Checks are going to be cut back and eventually eliminated. It has to happen. Whether it's Social Security, welfare, Medicare, Medicaid, you have to look at it and you have to provide for this because it's going to happen. The government cannot afford the promises that it's made. It's going to cause serious reforms made because more and more people are coming to the understanding that it's the government that got us into this jam. The government cannot get us out of it. We will have to get ourselves out of it. And the way we're going to do that is to rein in the government, to lessen their control over our lives, to take control back of our lives. We have to do it. And it will be done because unless Ron Paul is elected, and like I say, I've got issues with certain things that he says, but in terms of economics, which in the final analysis is the only issue that really matters here, because if you're broke, if you're destitute, if you're living on the street, you know what? You don't really care about global warming. And recycling, man, recycling is going into a trash bin, pulling out a deposit bottle and getting the money for it. That's all you care about, recycling. Mark Stein says that global warming and environmental consciousness are two of the highest forms of decadence of the American society. And I totally agree with him, because you should be worrying about how am I going to survive this? How am I going to protect my family? Not worrying about are we green enough? I mean, that is an indulgence and a decadence that we can't afford anymore. And this whole concept, I don't even want to get into the debate of whether there's global warming or not. It's pointless, because if you believe it, there's nothing I can say that will convince you. And if you don't believe it, you don't need to hear me talk about it. So in any event, go to kerrylutz.com. Get that plan. I've also got a Ron Paul flag that I want to send you. It's going viral. It's turning up all over the place. I'm fortunate because my landlord's brother is the artist behind it. It's going to take off. You are going to see this flag all over the country, on websites everywhere. It is an incredible thing. I can't even believe it. And you know, it's hard to get touched by modern art, but when you look at this flag, you feel it. You know that Ron Paul, for all of his faults, and there's plenty of them, and he may very well not be electable, but you know that Ron Paul has tapped into a vein of what made this country great. So look, don't let this depression split your family. Don't opt for what happened to my father's family. Do what my mother's family did. Find the skills that you can develop and help yourself. You can get through this, you will get through it, but you need a strategy and you need a plan. This is Kerry Lutz, been another Triple Lutz Report, signing off.